All right, welcome back to another installment on our Hardtail from Scratch series. In the first video, we went through and chopped off the rear section of our swing arm frame, and then we bent up this rigid section and we tacked it all together. So if you still need to do that to your frame, you need to go back and watch that video first. Basically, in this video, we're going to go through first and tack in all the last little bits and pieces we need to tack in, and then we're going to come through and I'm going to go into detail on how we're going to weld this thing out. So let's stop talking about it and let's get into it. Alright, so to start with this frame, where do we want to start? We've tacked all this rear section together now. Basically, I want to start down the bottom here and I want to get the gearbox sorted out. So obviously when we cut off our rear section of the swing arm frame, the rear gearbox mounts went with it. So on a rigid style, the rear gearbox mount's completely different. So we have to change all that over. So I make a few parts, well, my buddy Joel makes them for me, but I make a few parts to make this really easy to do. So these are the pressed plates and they go here and they are an exact copy of a OEM rigid style rear section. So there's two of these plates, one goes on top and one goes underneath. And they have laser cut holes in them, and this is for our solid stock to go through, and then it bolts to the bottom of our gearbox plate. So we're going to need to get one of these. Well, you should have one of these because it's the same on a swing arm. So basically our plate sits right here like that, and you can see these are our rear bolt holes right here, and they go through into the stock that I still need to machine. So that's basically the reason for these holes in here. And then another bit that Joel makes for me is this rear guard mount. So that goes between the two uprights that bolt to our gearbox plate, and that welds in there as well. And then you just have a little bolt here to mount your rear fender. So it's basically pretty straightforward how all this works. The only thing that we have to really mess around with is we got to cut these to size. We have this big long flange on it and we've got to cut these down to the desired length, and then we can tack them in position. Basically they're long like that just to make it easy to make. But let's go through and mark where we want to cut these. So we just got to make sure they're down solid. And then we will just put a little mark somewhere here, somewhere close to the center where we are going to weld them. So on all of these weld-on bits you'll see, they only weld along the side. They don't weld on the top of the frames. I think that's got something to do with distorting and making it a stress fracture area, because they do sort of bend a bit like this. So we're only going to weld along the sides of these plates. So I'm going to go through now, let's cut these to size, then we can tack them in position and then start making our little threaded bars that go in these holes. Alright, so now that we have our plates cut to size, just like this, we're going to stick them in position and just get some vice grips and clamp them where we want them to somewhere live. We still be able to knock them around a bit. I just want to make sure that they are pressed exactly where they need to be. So that guy on there like that. Freaking nice. And then this guy here like this. Freaking nice. So that's basically how they live. And then this guy, we need to bolt this up, and then we need to do some measuring so we can work out how long to make our threaded bar here, well, internally threaded stock. because on a pan and then on a shovel, they are different. This rear gearbox mount is actually a different height on pan. They are lower from memory. So we need to measure this up. They're 10 mil difference, so there's quite a bit. You can't just use a pan on a shovel, it won't work. So we'll bolt this up pretty quickly like that. And then basically what we want to do, we've got to measure through here. So measure through here and work out how long this is going to be. So we are working with, I want it a bit below the bottom. I can always give it a grind under here, but can't really add it. So I'm going to give it a little bit more. So we are looking at 86 mil. So I'm going to write that down because I'll fucking forget it. 86 millimeters. So all we can do now is make these bits, because once I put these bits in and we bolt them in, we can tackle this crap and then we can put on our little rear mount here. So let's take this back off and then go over to the lathe and start making this bit. Alright, so basically what I am going to do here, I have my stock cut to length, so that's my 86 mil that I was talking about. I have a 3/8/24 TPI tap ready to go, and all I'm going to do, I'm just going to drill a hole probably 1 inch deep, I reckon, and then I'll just tap it. Nothing crazy, I'm just going to speed it up and you can watch me do it. See ya. Alright, so here are my 2 bits of stock with my 3/8 holes in them, and the next bit is super simple. Chuck them in there. You can see when we cut our gearbox drive support thing here, I made sure that I cut it right on the shaft so that here we can just weld this straight back up like it never happened. I think I mentioned how important this thing was in the first video, so make sure you weld the absolute hell out of it. So basically all we do next is chuck it on our gearbox plate, tighten it right up. We don't want this thing to move at all. But you do have a little bit of play back and forth in this thing, so just make sure that you have it square. This one's quite good. Usually they're a bit hairy going. So, and then we just bolt through the back here and pick up our bits of stock that we just machined. A couple little bolts just like that. So tighten these up completely. And that lifts this up to the height that we want. Looks a freaking treat. Sweet, so tighten these up. How good is that? Make sure all this is pretty in line. It is, so all there is to do now is fucking tack this thing. So let's freaking do it. Couldn't really see that one, turned out alright. Tack these guys on too. Two for one. Alright, so that is basically it. I can take this crap off, take that off, and then that is pretty well our rear gearbox mount done. Next thing we'll do, we'll chuck this on, I reckon. Righto, so now that this is tacked up, I can pull all this off because I want to tack this on before I go too crazy welding the rest, I think. So I'll just undo all this quickly. That's freaking tight. Right, how good does that look? Nice and neat. Now, these things usually need a little bit of finessing, so I'm just going to give these a quick spruce up, and then we'll jam it on. Righto, so I have my little bit here, fits in there freaking nicely. So all there is left to do is tack this thing, really. Just wanna see if I can hold it. It sort of sits like 5mm down on the posts, so somewhere freaking there. Where's my rule? All right, sort of 5-ish down, nothing too accurate here, guys. Oh, fuck. All right, I'm gonna go 1/4 inch down, just for you American players at home. What are we working with? A little bit down. Yeah, boy. The light is affecting my helmet a bit. Righto. I think that is pretty good there. So that is pretty well this whole rear section tacked up on. Sweet, there you have it. Pretty well the only thing that this sort of rear section would be missing is that little support that sort of comes through here, but you got to be pretty in the know to be looking for that. So I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. That all still lines up a treat just because we tacked that top bit. No, chill, she's all sweet. So that is pretty well done. We're just gonna weld it out at the same time we weld the rest of the shit, but next thing we need to do is this one last tube just up here. All right, so now that we have all our gearbox mounts and all the plates and everything tacked into position and sorted out, basically the last thing we have to sort out before we start welding this thing out is our little tube here. So this little tube here is sort of where your seat sits. It also picks up your guard and sometimes also picks up the back of your oil bag. So it's a pretty important piece. So basically all that is just one little bend in there. It's a 10-degree bend. So once you've bent it, all you got to really make sure is that you get the thing perfectly in the center of your two tubes and in the right spot this direction. Now, if you don't have a frame lying around, it's pretty difficult to try and work out where the hell this is supposed to live, but I found a cool little detailed drawing online of a pan frame that I copy all the time. It's just on the wall over here. I'll spin this and show you. So just on my wall here is a very detailed pan photo there. So this is all the geometry of basically a pan frame, tells you all the little bits and pieces, even tells you the distance that we need to work out. So this here, so it tells us the distance from the center of our down tube to the center of the tube. So that says it's 8.86 inches. So come back over here, we'll have a look. So it says it's 8.86 from the center of our down tube here. So we sort of need to know how wide our tube needs to be. So I've already converted this because you've probably noticed through the videos that I convert a lot of stuff. Sometimes I measure in imperial, sometimes I measure in metric. It's just the beauty of the beast. It's like in Australia, everything's metric, but then I go and work on something like this and a lot of the stuff's imperial. So I'm always chopping and changing, converting back, using different. It's a bit annoying, but you get your head around it in the end. Anyway, I've converted it to 225 mil. You'll be surprised how much Harley stuff is metric. There's bearings and everything through the gearbox that are all metric. The main shaft's metric, it's 25 mil. There's so much metric stuff in Harleys, it's crazy. Anyway, so this is 225 mil, so that's down here. So what we want to do, we just want to measure roughly the width. So I'm going to make it a little bit longer just because it's hard to get the bend in the center sometimes and you got to move it back and forth. So I like to leave enough material. So I'm going to cut something 350 mil long and then we're going to do our 10-degree bend in the middle of it. By now you guys know how to use a bender, you've seen me use it a million times. I'm just going to go and bend that and then we'll chuck it up here and have a look where we need to cut it so that it fits perfectly in the center. Alright, so I have gone and bent this thing up. So I ended up putting a little bit more. I think I said 10 before. I went a bit closer to 15 just because I've got a frame here and I tried it on it and it looked a bit better with a bit more bend in it. So I ended up going 15. So that is friggin' that. So we want to mark where we're going to cut this thing. So like I said, I've lost my freaking white paint pen too. If you guys see it around, just let me know. I've only got this red one, which you can't see as well. Anyway, 225 is what we said, right? So I'm just going to roughly mark this, 225-ish. So that's sort of where it's going to live, the center of it. So it's 225 to the center. So roughly where it's going to live. So if it's going to the center, sort of the tops of the tube will sort of be somewhere there. So we want to freaking get the center of the bend in the middle of the frame, right? So I'm going to do something a little bit tricky here. Give me a sec, I forgot something. So I'm going to get my here square, my builder's square here. And like I said, my jig has a center line. So I can put the square up here. I know the outside of this is the center line, and just so happens that it's pretty close to where my freaking thing is. So because I've got the center line, I can just move my little guy back and forth to find center. But before I do that, I'm going to mark center of my bend to make my life a little bit easier. Somewhere there. Fuck, this pen sucks. Wish I had my white one. I don't know what the fuck I did with it. Alright, so that is somewhere center of the bend. Which side? I'm going to put on this side. So I'm just going to push this up like that. Keep that guy in the center. And then make sure that's right. Yep. That has to be square, otherwise it's not right. So somewhere there. So I'm just going to make a mark just on the inside, and we're going to cut this in the drop saw again. So I'm just marking the inside of the tube we're going to. So sort of ends up like that. Now one of these I'm going to have to cut like this, and then one is going to be able to be cut like that. So I can cut this one, I can't cut this one in my droppy, so I'm just going to have to try and be good here and translate this to the other side, just like that. Yep. Alright, let's go to the droppy and cut this thing. Alright, so after a little bit of fiddling, I got this bit to fit. I just sort of cleaned up the sides and stuff in the linisher, even put a bit of a scallop in there just to make it fit a bit nicer. Now, in other videos you've seen me do this before. To make this centerpiece freaking spot on, we run a bit of plate underneath it, and then we can just vice grip it on like that, and then the plate makes sure that our bit that we've just bent is square to the frame, so it's not on the piss like this and it's not on the piss like this. The other advantage to that is we can come through and clamp something to it so it doesn't move when we are trying to tack it. I'm going to do it off to the side just because then I can measure to the center, because the measurement is from the center of this tube to the center of this tube. So what do we say? 225 center to center. Freaking hell, that is almost spot on. So I'll move this up a bit, and then I want to make sure both sides are in the same spot. Like me fucking tools that I'm using, anything I can get my hands on I'm using. So 225, that's pretty well spot on there. And then I want to measure, I've got these two marks here that I have measured down to the axle plates and made sure they're in exactly the same spot. And then I can measure how far off that the tube is. So it's like 10 mil in front of it, and this side is not. So I need to go up a little bit and down a little bit. So what's that? Say 6-ish, still 10-ish. better. 8-ish. Freaking 8-ish. This is still right. Yeah. So, somewhere there. So let's freaking tack this thing, eh? How does it look? Give it the old squint from behind it. Check it out. Looks good. Let's fucking give it a tack. So the beauty of this, it's all going to stay in the same spot while I freaking tack it. A little bit of wind. Wind is not good for welding. Alrighty, I might do one more tack on top and then we'll frickin' call this thing tacked in position. See ya. So you're probably wondering about these big gaps here. Not that big really, but they don't really matter. They sort of act like a weld prep as well. So you can fill all that with weld, and then if someone was to come and, oh, you're kidding. If someone was to come and ground that in the future, grind it all down, doesn't matter, you've got heaps of weld in there. Now I need to find a fucking new rod. Alright, so that is pretty well all our bits and pieces tacked into this frame. So the last thing there really is to do on this is weld it out. Now, you sort of want to do it in a bit of a sequence, but you sort of, as long as you do what you just did to one side to the other side, you're fine. For instance, if you've just welded around the top of this one, you should go ahead and weld around the top of this one. So you probably noticed it when I was tacking in the last video. I always tack the same place on both sides, so that whatever happens to one side will happen to the other and they will stay the same. That's the theory anyway. So when I come through and weld this thing, I will probably start at the axle plates and I'll probably do a hot run around it first, just to really dig it in there, like a hot no fill pass, and that'll really open it up and crater it out and really get the heat in there. And I'll do this one and then that one and then this one and then that one. So I'm not just completely welding this one out and then completely welding that one out. I'm going to do the same on each side. So like I said, I'll probably go around and do a hot pass, just like a fill pass, and then I will come back after that and do like a cap pass. But to start with, I'll probably go around, just do hot passes to start with. So I'll probably start at the axle plates, like I said, weld them out, and then I'll come up here, do some welding around here, and then I'll come back to the center and then weld up our little center mount here, and then I'll probably do our gearbox stuff last. So just because all this is clamped down, this isn't gonna move, so I would rather weld all this stuff first, make that solid, and then we can just worry about this shit later. So you probably don't need to watch me weld out the whole thing, so I'll just time lapse most of it, and then if there's anything I need to show you that I think is important, we will stop the time lapse and I will throw your lookers over it. Alright, so I just wanted to show you, I've basically just done a hot pass around this thing, and you can see it's sort of got a crater in it. So I haven't completely filled it up yet. So I wanted to do a little weld map demonstration for you, why we do that, instead of just going in red hot and just doing a big hot pass around it. So I'll draw this for you, right? So we're talking about a butt weld here. This is what we call a butt weld. Now a butt weld is when you have two bits of tube or pipe or fucking steel or whatever going into each other, and we've got to weld this area here. If you were to just put a weld on top here, it's only going to go to here, and you're only going to have this much connection being welded. From here to here is the only bit being welded. But if we were to do, let's say we'll do the same joint, but we'll put a chamfer on it, and that is what we've done here, right? We've put the chamfer on it. So when we weld this, you know, we've got all this material here. We can put all these welds in here if we wanted to. And we have all this weld material here being, you know, joined together. So what I'm doing with the hot pass here, what the idea of that is, draw another one. So say this is our butt weld again. If I was to come in here and just do a super hot fill weld on this, what it would look like, that would be the weld on top, but it wouldn't go the whole way down into the root. This is what we call the root down here. The weld wouldn't get in there. So the idea of the hot pass I'm doing, with not much, we'll draw another one, with not much filler rod, it's another root like this. So the idea is the hot pass comes in and goes down in here, gets right into the root of the weld here. So that is where we get all our strength from. And then over the top, I'm going to do the hot pass over the top of this one. So instead of it being like this one where we didn't penetrate down the bottom, we penetrate right down the bottom and get the weld the whole way up the root here, not halfway up like this one was. So that's the idea of welding around this thing twice. So now that I have got most of the way around, like underneath here, I've missed a little bit. That's cool. We can get that when we take this frame out. As long as majority is welded out, we're all sweet. So now that I have done my root runs on our axle plates, I'm probably just going to come up the line here. I'm going to do the same at the top here, and then I'll weld this, and then we will get to welding all our gearbox stuff. So all this stuff's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to weld all this stuff because it's not a root weld, it's just a fillet. And this I'll probably put a bit more time into because I've got to do a couple runs there just to fill this gap that I've got. But like I said, that'll act as a weld prep and make it stronger, no big deal. So let's get into that. I'm just going to time lapse once again, and when I come to something I need to talk about, we will stop and chat about it. Right, so I've welded pretty well majority of all the axle plates and the top section of the frame. Now we need to weld out our gearbox support and our joining butt welds here. Now obviously because the table is right here, I can't get all the way around and weld this, but it's really not a big issue. Once we've welded all this guy out and all the axle plates and everything else, this guy, as long as we've majority welded it, it'll be fine. We can take this thing out of the jig and just weld up the bottom and finish it off. So I'm gonna weld as much as I can of this, and then we're gonna go through and I'm gonna weld out as much as I can of our rear gearbox mount here. And then I'll probably go back and we will do some finishing passes on the axle plates, and then we'll take this thing out and, like I said, finish off all these welds. I just thought I'd show you, I did most of the gearbox support. Now I'm gonna go through and I have been doing the fill runs on these axle plates. So on this two sides I've done, this one I was gonna show you, but little trick, get yourself a little freaking wire brush. And if you wire all the smoke and burn and stuff off it, you sort of get an idea how it's going to look when it's painted. So you can see how nice that looks. Now it's a nice oval sort of a weld, doesn't have a convex in it. So they are done. I'm going to do this side over here now. You can see I still have sort of a crater in there. I want to fill that and make it a proud weld. So I basically got the welder on a similar setting. It's probably a little bit colder just because I want it to rise a bit more instead of penetrating in. So we're just going to run over this thing nice and slow and make sure we put heaps of filler in. So there you have it. You see I've got plenty of filler in there. It's a nice proud weld. It's not recessed anymore. I don't have any undercut or nothing on it. With a TIG welder, right, I can start and stop as many times as I want because I don't have to add material and I can just burn into the stop and the start. If you're doing this with a MIG, you should grind out your stop and your start, just because when you're letting off, sometimes it gets a little crater in there, sometimes it doesn't penetrate very well. So good practice is to grind out your stop and starts and then run over them, and then when you grind them flat again, it's a nice weld the whole way around. I've done a lot of oil and gas welding, and this is sort of some of the procedures that you follow to do, you know, welds to a code standard. So might as well apply the same shit to your trusty crappy old chopper frame, and then it will never fail on your welds. So I'm going to go through and finish welding all of this, or cap run all of these, and then we can go, and I'm probably going to take this frame out and then we can start welding up the rest of it. Alright, so I've basically gotten to the point on this thing that I have welded fucking probably 98% of it. So the rest of the bits that I can't get to, I still need to weld. So now it's time to get this out of the jig and have a look at it for the first time. It's a bit stubborn. There we go. Ugh. There is our first freaking look at it. Looks like a rigid frame, so we're obviously on the right track. So like I said, I'm just going to flip this thing upside down now, and we'll go through and just weld the last little bits, home stretch. So let's get done. Alright, so I have a few little bits to fix up under here. I've welded up my butt welds for my new tubes, fixed up a little bit of welding that I had underneath here, and pretty well one of the last things I have to do is weld out the bottom of my threaded slugs for my gearbox mount. So I'm just going to time lapse all this. I'm going to weld this up. I think I've got a little bit more welding to do under there, and then I'm going to start blending all this stuff and making it nice, do a bit of grinding up here to fix up some of these plug holes that I got, and then it's pretty well done. I think I'm just going to give this thing a little coat of black, I think, just so I don't know what the customer's intentions are. If it's going to sit around, it's a bit of a pain. You do a brand new frame and they just leave it sitting around for a while and then it rusts. So I'm going to give it a quick lick of black before it goes out, but before I can do any of that, let's finish this thing off. Now, because I'm welding a really thick piece of stock here, I'm going to absolutely pump the welding hot. Alright, that is this frame completely finished. I just gave it a lick of paint as you guys just watched, and it is all done, ready to go back to the customer. There's probably like 20 hours in this thing, putting that rear section together and welding it all together, so it's probably really not that bad. In Australia, it cost us heaps to get stuff sent over here. I don't know why US shippers are so freaking expensive. Like, if we just get a tiny little order that is in a tiny little box like this, it's like $60 US to ship it over here. It's crazy. So if you were to buy like a complete weld-on hardtail, like a complete one you would just stab in there and weld on, we'd probably pay 500 or 600 US in shipping. So doing it this way is really, really cost effective. Like, this axle plates you get from Lowbrow, I think they are like 400 Australian landed or something. So by the time you just get those and then fabricate this rear section and weld it on, you could probably just land a rear section. And then if you can't do it yourself, you got to pay someone to do it anyway. So I like doing it this way. When you're doing funky frames and stuff, it's really good to do it like this, because you can always chop and change stuff and make stuff work how it needs to. If you've got a frame, a rear section that is designed to fit on a certain model or something, you're going to be chopping and changing in any way to put it on something weird that you're trying to do. So 9 times out of 10, this is the way I like to do it, just because, like I said, if something weird comes up, then we'll be able to fix it. So that is it for this video. Like I said, coming up over the Christmas break, I've got another frame to do, but it's going to be completely from scratch. So I'm going to be bending up the entire thing, not just a rear section. I'm going to go through, I've got to machine up a neck, and then I have to, make all these plates to hold the neck. I've got to make the backbone, I've got to make the down tube, I've got to make all the engine mounts. I've got to make a whole one from scratch. So that'll be a few part series, I think. There's definitely more than 20 hours in that. So that's coming up over the Christmas break. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. And I'm not sure what I'm going to put out next. So I'll see you then anyway.